On her 18th birthday, Omega Adira expects to be claimed by her fated mate, the future Alpha Peter. Instead, at the sacred moon ceremony, he publicly rejects her. Before the entire Silverpelt pack, he declares her weak and unsuitable, shattering their bond and choosing her cruel, ambitious sister, Delilah. Utterly broken, Adira's life is over. But her collapse is witnessed by a silent, terrifying observer. The legendary Lycan King, Michael, is present. He's enraged by the insult to the goddess and intrigued by the scent of the rejected Omega. Chapter 1. The Omega's Hope. The air in the grand clearing crackled with an energy that was half magic, half anticipation. It smelled of ancient pine, damp earth, and the metallic tang of shifting wolves. Adira, an Omega of the Silverpelt pack, stood near the back, as was her place. Her hands were clammy, twisting the rough fabric of her simple linen dress. Tonight was the moon ceremony. Tonight was her 18th birthday. Tonight, her life would finally begin. She tried to calm her racing heart, but it thudded against her ribs like a trapped bird. For years, the bond had been a quiet hum beneath her skin, a silver thread connecting her to him. Peter. The future Alpha. Their fated mating was the pack's worst-kept secret, a source of whispered envy, and, for Adira, a fragile, desperate hope. It was the one thing that made being an Omega, the pack's lowest-ranking member, bearable. Her gaze drifted to the front of the clearing, where her older sister, Delilah, stood among the elite. Delilah was beautiful, her dark hair gleaming in the moonlight, her laughter loud and confident as she spoke with the other ranking warriors. She'd always overshadowed Adira, always been the popular one, the one their parents praised. Adira felt the familiar, dull ache of inadequacy, but she pushed it down. Tonight, popularity didn't matter, rank didn't matter, only the moon goddess and the fate she had decreed. The pack Alpha, Peter's father, raised his hands. A hush fell over the hundreds of wolves assembled. Tonight, his deep voice boomed, we honor the moon goddess. We honor the bonds she gifts us. We secure the future of the Silverpelt pack. A howl rose from the crowd, and Adira shivered, the sound vibrating deep in her bones. The moon climbed higher, a perfect, luminous circle of power, casting the clearing in ethereal silver and black. Adira's breath hitched. She could feel it now, the pull. The bond was flaring, becoming a tangible rope in her gut, tugging her forward. He was close. Peter was feeling it too. He stepped into the center of the clearing. Peter was everything an Alpha should be, tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of command that made others bow instinctively. He was the man she had dreamed of, the one who would finally see her, the one who would elevate her from nothing to Luna. Peter's eyes scanned the crowd. Adira's heart stopped. See me? She prayed, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. Please, see me. His gaze swept past the front ranks, over his fawning admirers, and finally landed directly on her. He stared, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark in the moonlight. The clearing felt silent, shrinking, until it was just the two of them. The pull in her stomach became an undeniable yank. Then, his voice, booming with the dominance of his alpha blood, cut through the night. Adira. He had called her. He had called her name. A dizzying wave of relief and joy washed over her. The whispers around her confirmed it. It was real. This was it. Come, Peter commanded. Her legs, shaking, obeyed. She pushed past the other Omegas, her head held high for the first time in her life. She walked toward her destiny, her fated mate, her future. She was so focused on his face that she almost missed the look in his eyes. It wasn't the warmth of a destined lover. It was cold, sharp, and full of a contempt she had never seen before. But she was already moving, already committed. the entire pack's attention fixed on her as she stepped into the center of the clearing. Chapter 2. The Moon's Zenith. Adira stood frozen in the center of the clearing, a sacrifice offered to an angry god. The silence was absolute. Even the night insects had ceased their chirping. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but the only ones she could see were Peter's. They were as cold and hard as chips of obsidian. The love she thought she'd seen in them for years was a phantom, a story she had told herself. This was the truth. This was the real Peter. "Peter?" she whispered, the sound stolen by the heavy night air. Her bond was a live wire, screaming mate, 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 while her instincts screamed danger. He didn't answer. He simply watched her, his expression a mask of bored calculation. From the corner of her eye, Adira was vaguely aware of the guests of honor on the raised granite platform. The pack alpha, Peter's father, sat beside an empty seat, with the other visiting dignitaries. It was said a representative of the Lycan King himself was present, a formality for the ceremony of a prominent pack. Adira's humiliation was not just private, it was political. Peter let the silence stretch, wringing every drop of power from it. He let her tremble, let the pack's whispers start to rise. "An Omega," someone hissed. "He can't be serious," another murmured. Peter raised a hand, and the whispers died instantly. He looked at her, but he spoke to the pack, his voice a polished, confident baritone. "We gather under the goddess's eye to secure the future of our pack, a future that must be powerful, a future that must be pure, a future that cannot be built on a mistake of fate." Mistake? The word hit Adira like a physical slap. The joy and relief that had carried her to the center of the clearing curdled into a cold, sickening dread. "For years," Peter continued, pacing slowly around her, "we have assumed the goddess's will." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the sharp scent of mint and pine on him. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, cruel tone meant only for her, though the entire pack watched. "Did you really think," he sneered, "that you could be Luna? Did you really think I would bind myself to weakness?" Her breath hitched. The hope that had been her only shield for 18 years began to crack. She looked to his father, the Alpha, but he was watching his son with a guarded expression, making no move to intervene. Peter straightened up, his face hardening as he turned back to the crowd. He took a deep, theatrical breath, puffing his chest with the dominance of his bloodline. The moon was at its absolute zenith, its white light pouring down on him like a spotlight. He was the perfect picture of a future alpha, and he was about to pass his first sentence. His eyes met hers one last time, devoid of any warmth, any history, any mercy. "Our future must be strong," he declared, his voice ringing with finality. He pointed a single damning finger directly at her. Chapter 3. I reject you. "I, Peter, future alpha of the Silverpelt Pack," he roared, his voice amplified by a preternatural power that sent shivers down every spine, "do publicly reject you, Adira, as my fated mate." The word struck Adira with the force of a physical blow. It was not just an emotional wound, it was a spiritual cataclysm. A searing, blinding pain erupted in her chest as the silver thread of their fated bond, the one she had felt since she was 16, was not cut, but torn. It felt like her very soul was being ripped in half. She gasped, a strangled, inhuman sound, and stumbled back, clutching her chest as the agony brought her to her knees. The pack gasped as one. This was not a simple severing. This was a public execution of a sacred pact. Peter watched her collapse with a look of profound disgust. "The moon goddess was mistaken," he spat, his voice dripping with arrogance. He pointed to her, a trembling, weeping heap on the ground. "Our pack cannot be led by weakness. We cannot be represented by this." He sneered, the sound echoing in the horrified silence. "She is weak. She is unsuitable. And she is nothing but an Omega. The last word was a curse. The pain in her chest flared, white-hot and blinding. She couldn't breathe. The world was tilting, the silver moonlight turning sickly and gray. She could hear the whispers now, the shock giving way to murmurs of agreement. He was the Alpha. His word was law. If he said she was weak, she was weak. If he said the goddess was wrong, he must be right. Her world had shattered. The one person who was supposed to be her destiny, her protector, her other half, was the one wielding the knife. She looked up, desperate, through a haze of tears. She looked at Peter's father, who sat stone-faced. She looked at the pack members she had known her whole life, who now looked away, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. She was alone. She was nothing. Peter drank in the sight of her, broken and kneeling before him. A small, satisfied smirk played on his lips. He had done it. He had unburdened himself of his fated duty, but the ceremony was not over. The pack still needed a Luna. "My pack," Peter announced, his voice smooth and confident once more, "deserves a real Luna, a strong Luna, one I have chosen." The pain was still a tidal wave, drowning her, but through it, Adira heard his words. Her vision blurred. Chosen? He was turning away from her. He was scanning the crowd, his eyes landing on someone in the front rank, among the elite warriors. A triumphant smile lit his face. Adira, on her hands and knees, followed his gaze. He was moving, his purpose clear. He was walking toward the one person she had always loved, always trusted. He was walking toward her sister. Chapter 4. The Sister's Betrayal. Adira's mind, numb and buzzing with the agony of the broken bond, struggled to process what she was seeing. Peter wasn't just walking toward Delilah. He was walking for her. Delilah, her beautiful, popular, perfect older sister, stepped forward from the crowd. There was no surprise on her face. No sisterly concern for Adira, who was still bleeding her soul onto the cold earth of the clearing. Instead, a slow, triumphant smile spread across Delilah's face. It was a look of pure, calculated victory. This was not a surprise. This was a coronation. Peter reached her and, without a word, grabbed Delilah by the waist. He pulled her into a deep, passionate, and possessive kiss, right in front of Adira, right in front of the entire pack. It was a brutal public declaration, a branding. The pack's stunned silence turned into a new, confused murmur. This was a betrayal beyond reckoning. Peter broke the kiss, but he kept Delilah plastered against his side. He lifted her hand, his eyes blazing with pride. "This is your future Luna!" he roared. "Delilah, my chosen mate!" For a moment, the pack hesitated. To reject a fated mate was a profound insult to the goddess, but to defy a future alpha was pack suicide. Slowly, a few scattered claps began, then a few more. Within moments, the clearing was filled with a ragged, uncertain, but growing cheer. They were choosing their alpha. They were choosing power over fate. They were choosing Delilah over Adira. The sound of their applause was a second assault. Adira, forgotten on the ground, felt the last of her strength leave her. She looked up, her vision tunneling, her breath coming in shallow, painful rasps. Through the haze of her tears, she saw her sister. Delilah was looking right at her. Over Peter's shoulder, as he nuzzled her neck and accepted the pack's adulation, Delilah's eyes met Adira's. She didn't look away. She held her sister's broken gaze, and she smirked. It was a small, vicious, knowing expression that said, "You never had a chance. He was always mine." The dual betrayal, her mate, her sister, was a final, killing blow. The agony in her chest, the public humiliation, and the crushing weight of that single, triumphant smirk was more than her spirit could bear. The world went black at the edges. Her body, no longer able to support even her grief, gave out. Adira collapsed, unconscious, onto the damp earth. The last sound she registered was the pack cheering for Peter and Delilah. But as her consciousness faded, a new sound cut through the celebration. It was not a cheer. It was a low, resonant growl that vibrated in her very bones. It was a sound of ancient, cold, and absolute fury. Chapter 5. The Shadow of the King. The cheering for the new alpha pair died instantly, frozen in the pack's throats. The air, which moments before had been filled with celebration, suddenly became heavy, cold, and electric with dread. That growl had not come from a silver-pelt wolf. It was too deep, too old, too saturated with a power that choked the breath from their lungs. Peter's father, Alpha Borin, had been rising to his feet to congratulate his son, a politically necessary, if uneasy, smile on his face. He froze. "My son has made his choice," he began, but his voice faltered as the growl echoed again, this time seeming to come from everywhere at once. The pressure in the clearing dropped. The silver moonlight seemed to dim, as if a great cloud had passed over the moon. A terrifying, ancient power rolled over the assembly like a physical wave, pressing down on every wolf. It was pure, unadulterated dominance. Omegas and betas were forced to their knees. Warriors and even Peter himself bowed their heads, their wolves whining in submission. Alpha Borin was forced to bend his knee, a profound act of submission on his own territory. This was not pack authority. This was the authority of the world. Every eye, wide with terror, turned to the raised granite platform reserved for the guests of honor. A figure was emerging from the deep shadows, stepping into the dying moonlight. He had been a silent observer, a formality. He was interfering now. It was King Michael, the legendary, ruthless Lycan King, the ruler of all packs, the Alpha of Algas, the last of the ancient bloodline. He was a myth of terror told to disobedient pups, and he was here. He was tall, dressed in dark, severe leathers that made no sound, and he moved with a fluid grace that was more predator than man. His power radiated from him in visible, suffocating waves, but it was his eyes that held the pack captive. They were not the blue, brown, or even yellow of a normal werewolf. They were burning with an unnatural, molten gold light, and they were not looking at Peter, the new alpha. They were not looking at Delilah, the new Luna. They were not looking at Alpha Borin. His gaze, blazing with a terrifying cold fury, was fixed on the small, broken form of the rejected Omega, lying unconscious in the dirt. The king was enraged. The pack could smell it. It was not the hot, quick anger of a pack dispute. It was the cold, patient, absolute wrath of an ancient force. It smelled like ozone, blood, and a coming storm. He took one slow, deliberate step off the platform and onto the sacred ground of the clearing. His heavy boot made no sound on the stones. He began to walk, his eyes never leaving Adira. The king was moving. Chapter 6. The Goddess's Insult. King Michael stood over her, a mountain of shadow and power. The pack was so quiet he could hear the frantic pounding of their hearts. They were terrified, as they should be. He had come to the Silverpelt pack to observe. Their alpha, Borin, had been petitioning him for greater territory, and Michael had come to judge his worthiness, to see how he ran his pack, how he honored the old ways. And this? This was what he found. A circus. A sacrilege. His golden eyes were fixed on Adira. He could smell the spiritual rot of her broken bond, a scent like ozone and ash, a perfume of profound agony that offended his ancient sensibilities. This was a direct, public, and arrogant insult to the moon goddess. A fated bond was her most sacred gift. To reject it was spitting in her face. To do it with such theatrical cruelty, it was a declaration of hubris that his authority could not ignore. Peter, his foolish bravado evaporating, finally found his voice. "Your Majesty," he stammered, his alpha tone cracking under the pressure of the king's dominance. "This is a simple pack matter. She She was unsuitable. She is just an omega. The king's head snapped toward him. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply looked at Peter. The air temperature in the clearing dropped by 20 degrees. Peter choked on his next word, the air freezing in his lungs. The king's aura flared, a suffocating blanket of pure dominance that forced Peter to his knees. Just an omega. The words echoed in the king's mind. He had ruled for centuries. He had seen alphas rise and fall. He knew power when he saw it, and he knew arrogance. But as he looked back at the girl, he smelled something else beneath the agony. It was faint, buried deep, but it was there. A scent of winter pine, ancient stone, and a spark of dormant, fiery magic. It was a scent that had no business being in a weak omega. It was a scent that called to him. His rage, which had been a cold, calculated thing, now had a new, personal edge. These fools hadn't just insulted the goddess. They had broken something precious. He ignored Peter's pathetic, wheezing gasps. He ignored Delilah, who was hiding behind her new mate, her pretty face a mask of terror. He ignored Alpha Boran, who was trembling on his platform. His entire world narrowed to the girl on the ground. In a move that sent a tidal wave of shock through the pack, King Michael, the ruthless Lycan King, knelt in the dirt. He knelt before the rejected omega. He reached out a single black-gloved hand, his movements slow, deliberate. His fingers, a symbol of so much death and power, hovered over her tear-streaked face. He brushed a matted strand of hair from her cheek. She was cold, lifeless. "They did this to you," he whispered, so low only he could hear. He hooked his gloved hand under her chin, his touch firm. "Look at me." Chapter 7. The King's Bond. The command was not a request. It was an ancient law, imbued with a power that bypassed her broken consciousness and spoke directly to her soul. Adira's eyelids fluttered. She was trapped in a black, agonizing void, the pain of Peter's rejection the only thing that existed. But this voice, it was a new sun, burning through the darkness. She was forced to obey. Her eyes, dull, glassy, and swimming with unshed tears, opened. They were empty. She was a shell, her spirit already half gone. Her unfocused, broken gaze drifted up and met his. The world ended. It was not a gentle hum, not a silver thread of fate. It was a cataclysm, a supernova of destiny. The moment her broken blue eyes met his burning gold ones, a bond exploded into existence. It was a golden, fiery, and furious connection that slammed into them both with the force of a physical blow. Adira gasped, a ragged, desperate intake of breath, as the bond, a king's bond, seized her very essence. It was a power so vast it was terrifying. It surged from Michael into her, a tidal wave of ancient strength, and it met a tiny, dormant spark deep within her own soul, fanning it into an inferno. For Adira, the agonizing, tearing pain of Peter's rejection was instantly and utterly incinerated. It was vaporized, as if it had never existed. In its place, this new golden power flooded her, mending the tear in her spirit, sealing the wound in her soul. It was warm, it was absolute, and it was possessive. For Michael, it was a shock that rocked him to his core. He, who had lived for 1,000 years, who had long assumed his fated mate was dust, had found her, here, now. A broken child, kneeling in the mud, rejected by a pathetic alpha pup. The scent he'd detected, pine and stone and magic, it was her. It was his. His rage, already a mountain, became a volcano. This was not just an insult to the goddess. This was not just the breaking of a pack omega. This was a direct, personal, and unforgivable assault on his queen. Adira's eyes, which had been empty, suddenly focused. She was no longer looking at a terrifying stranger. She was no longer looking at a king. She was looking at the other half of her own soul. The pain was gone. The confusion was gone. There was only him. Michael's face, which had been a mask of cold fury, twisted into something far more dangerous. He rose to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his golden eyes burning with a new, terrifying purpose. He had not just found an injustice. He had found his mate. Chapter 8. Delivered to Me. The power radiating from the king and the Omega was a tangible thing, a crackling golden aura that shimmered in the moonlight, pushing back against the cold. Adira was still on her knees, but she was no longer a heap. Her back was straight, her head high. Her eyes, now clear and sharp, were locked on Michael. Peter, who had managed to get to his feet, stared in disbelief. The scent of his broken bond with Adira was gone, replaced by an overwhelming, possessive, and ancient scent that was coming from her. From the king. What did you do?" Peter stammered, his voice weak. He took an instinctive step forward. She was, Michael snarled. His head snapped to Peter, and this time, there was no cold calculation in his eyes. There was only the white-hot promise of death. She was yours to cherish, yours to protect, yours to honor. He took one slow step toward Peter and Delilah. They stumbled back, tripping over each other. Delilah, who had been smirking just moments before, was now as white as the moon above, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond mere pack politics. "You," Michael hissed, his voice a low, deadly vibration. He pointed a single black-gloved finger at Peter, mimicking the gesture of rejection Peter had used on Adira. "You have rejected your destiny. You have defiled a sacred bond. You have cast aside the one chosen for you by the moon goddess." He paused, a cruel, cold smile touching his lips. He let his gaze slide to Delilah, who whimpered and tried to hide behind Peter. "You cast her aside," Michael's voice dripped with contempt. "For this, for ambition, for a worthless, hollow-hearted—" He cut himself off, his fury too great for simple insults. He turned back to Peter, his eyes blazing. "And in your arrogance," he continued, his voice rising to a thunderous, dominant roar that shook the very trees, "in your blindness, you have delivered her. To me." The last two words were a shockwave. Michael stalked back to Adira. He didn't offer his hand. He gripped her arm, his touch firm and possessive, and pulled her to her feet. He hauled her against his side, tucking her small frame against his, a clear, unmistakable gesture of ownership. She stumbled, her legs still weak, but he held her up, his arm a band of steel around her waist. Peter stared, his mind finally, sluggishly, comprehending the sheer scale of his mistake. "No," he whispered. "You can't. She's an Omega. She's nothing." Michael actually laughed, a short, harsh, and terrifying sound. He looked down at Adira, his golden eyes momentarily softening as he took in her shocked but steady gaze. He turned his head, looking directly at the horrified pack. "Witness," he commanded. "Witness what happens to a gift of the goddess when it is given to one who is worthy." Chapter 9. The Claiming. "No!" Peter screamed, a desperate, broken sound. He lunged forward, his alpha instincts finally overriding his fear, driven by a sudden, agonizing wave of jealousy he couldn't understand. "She's mine." He didn't make it 2 steps. King Michael didn't even look at him. He simply flared his aura, and an invisible wall of power slammed into Peter, throwing him backward as if he'd been hit by a tree. He crashed to the ground, skidding in the dirt, the air knocked from his lungs. "She," Michael snarled, his eyes flashing, "is everything." He turned his full attention back to Adira. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the raw, volcanic power of the king's bond singing in her veins. It was a roaring lion where Peter's bond had been a dying bird. Michael lifted his free hand, his bare fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his gaze possessive. "They will never hurt you again," he vowed, his voice a low promise that was more binding than any oath. She believed him. He tilted her head, exposing the pale, vulnerable skin of her neck, right where a faded mark should have been. She drew a sharp, sudden breath, her eyes locking with his. There was no question in his gaze, no hesitation. There was only certainty. This was not a choice. This was destiny. "You are mine," he growled. He lowered his head. He didn't just nip. He didn't just mark. He claimed. His fangs, longer and sharper than any normal wolf's, extended. He sank his teeth deep into the claiming spot, branding her, binding her, body and soul, to him for eternity. The moment his fangs pierced her skin, the king's bond detonated. It was not pain. It was a blinding, healing, ecstatic fire. The last spiritual shards of Peter's broken bond were instantly incinerated. Adira screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated power. Her bones felt as if they were being reforged, her blood turning to liquid gold. The ancient strength of the Lycan lineage flooded her, not as a gift, but as an awakening. It unlocked a power that had been dormant in her own bloodline for generations. A visible wave of golden energy erupted from her, a shockwave of pure magic that blasted outward, forcing the entire pack to shield their eyes. Michael lifted his head. His lips were stained with her blood. He licked the wound clean, his tongue sealing the mark, and it healed instantly, leaving behind a new, intricate, and glowing golden mark, the mark of a queen. Adira's eyes, which had been filling with tears, flew open. The terrified pale blue of the Omega was gone. They were now a bright, sharp, and startling shade of sapphire, ringed with the same unnatural, burning gold as his. She was no longer Adira, the rejected. She was Adira, the claimed. Chapter 10. The Departure. The clearing was silent, save for Peter's ragged, choked sobs. He was kneeling, staring at the golden mark on Adira's neck, his face a mask of profound, soul-shattering regret. The bond, his bond, was truly gone, and the void it left was a black hole of agony that he would never recover from. Adira stood tall, her hand resting on the king's chest. The world was new. The colors were sharper, the smells overwhelming. She could smell the sour, acidic fear coming from Delilah. She could smell the acrid, sickening self-loathing pouring from Peter. And beneath it all, she could smell him. Michael, her mate. He smelled of pine, of ozone, of ancient stone and absolute, unshakable power. The new, golden energy hummed in her veins, a comforting, heavy weight. King Michael kept her tucked against his side, his arm a possessive shield. He surveyed the stunned, prostrate pack. His gaze was glacial. "The silver pelt pack," he stated, his voice flat and void of all emotion, "is in disgrace. You have insulted your goddess. You have permitted the desecration of a sacred bond. You have wronged your queen." The word queen struck the pack like a physical blow. A new, desperate wave of prostration rippled through the crowd. Alpha Boran, his face pressed into the dirt, pleaded, "Your Majesty, Queen Adira, forgive us. We did not know. It was my son." "It was," Michael agreed, his voice deadly. He looked at Peter. "A mistake he will have a lifetime to regret." Delilah, her mind finally snapping, let out a hysterical laugh. No, it's a trick. I'm the Luna. He chose me. She's an Omega. She's nothing." "Be silent," Adira said. Her voice was quiet. It was not a shout. It was not a plea. But it was laced with the new golden power of her bond, and it carried the authority of the king. Delilah's hysterical shrieks cut off instantly, as if her throat had been squeezed shut. The entire pack flinched. Adira, the Omega, had just commanded silence, and she had received it. Michael looked down at her, a flicker of dark pride in his golden eyes. "There is nothing for you here," he said, his voice softer, for her alone. Adira looked at the pack members who had scorned her. She looked at her sister, who was now weeping silent, furious tears. And she looked at Peter, the man who had been her sun and stars, and felt nothing. Only a cold, distant pity. He was pathetic. He was weak. The king was right. She turned her back on all of it, the clearing, her family, her entire life. She did not feel a single pang of loss. "Come," Michael commanded. He began to walk toward the edge of the forest, and Adira, the once weak Omega, walked with him, her steps steady, her head high. As they moved, silent, black-clad Lycan warriors, the king's royal guard, materialized from the shadows, their golden eyes identical to his. They formed a silent, lethal perimeter around their king and his new queen. Adira took her first step out of the clearing, her hand still resting on her mate's arm, leaving her past to rot. She was heading to the Lycan King's court, a place of treacherous ancient power. She was terrified. But as she felt the steady, possessive thrum of the king's bond, she was, for the first time in her life, not weak. Chapter 11. The Lycan Court. The journey was a disorienting blur of motion. Adira was half carried, half led by Michael through a tear in the air, a shadow walk that bypassed the physical world. One moment, she was in the damp, familiar forest of the Silverpelt pack. The next, she was standing on polished black marble so cold it seeped through the thin soles of her shoes. The Lycan King's court was not a fortress built on a mountain. It was a fortress carved from its very heart. The ceilings soared hundreds of feet overhead, lost in shadow, held up by massive, unadorned pillars of black stone. Braziers burned with a cold blue fire that cast long, dancing shadows but provided little warmth. The air was dry and ancient, smelling of dust, ozone, and the overwhelming, territorial scent of hundreds of powerful, unfamiliar lichens. If the Silverpelt clearing had been a stage, this was a pantheon. Her simple linen dress, still stained with dirt and tears from the clearing, felt like a beggar's rag. The Lycans here were dressed in dark, rich velvets, furs, and leathers. They were all tall, all beautiful, and all terrifying, and every single one of them had stopped to stare at her. "His Majesty has returned," a voice cried out, but it was unnecessary. Every Lycan in the vast hall had already dropped into a deep, respectful bow. Michael didn't slow, his arm still a possessive band of steel around her waist. He strode through the parting sea of powerful beings, his boots echoing with sharp, authoritative clicks on the marble. Adira was towed in his wake, her heart hammering. This was a court of predators. She had been an Omega, the lowest of the low, for her entire life. Now she was surrounded by beings who were to an Alpha what an Alpha was to her. She felt their eyes on her, a physical weight of suspicion. She could hear their whispered, sibilant thoughts, a low buzz in her mind she couldn't quite decipher, a new and unsettling ability. She saw their gazes drop to the glowing golden mark on her neck, then rise to her face with a mixture of shock, confusion, and undisguised contempt. They, too, smelled the Omega on her. They smelled the weakness of her former pack. "A wolf?" one woman hissed, her eyes like emerald chips of ice. "She is marked," another breathed, his hand going to his chest in shock. "They will learn," Michael growled. His voice a low rumble meant only for her. He didn't seem to care about their opinions. He didn't acknowledge a single one of them. He just kept walking, pulling her toward a massive, throne-like chair carved from a single piece of obsidian. He finally stopped, turning to face the hall, pulling her in front of him, his back to the throne. He kept her tucked against his chest, his chin resting protectively over her head. He was presenting her. A high-ranking, silver-haired male stepped forward, his face a mask of polite inquiry. "Your Majesty, you were gone but a day. What is this? Who is this?" The question hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. The entire court was waiting. Michael's grip on her waist tightened, and she felt the lethal, possessive power thrumming just beneath his skin. ready to be unleashed. Chapter 12. A King's Protection. King Michael looked down at the silver-haired Lycan. Adira recognized him as Lord Valerius, the king's chief advisor, his face a web of aristocratic lines and cold intelligence. "This," Michael said, his voice flat and absolute, "is Adira, my mate, your queen." A collective, sharp intake of breath hissed through the hall. Valerius's eyes widened, his gaze flicking from the king's implacable face to Adira's wide, sapphire gold eyes. His gaze lingered on her cheap, torn dress and the dirt on her cheek. Queen," he repeated, his voice carefully neutral. "From where does she hail, my king? She smells of her destiny." Michael cut him off, his voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "Which, I might add, is now my destiny. And yours. You will all show her the respect she is owed." He began to turn, intending to dismiss them, but a young, arrogant Lycan from the back, his face flushed with indignation, pushed his way forward. "But Majesty, she is a wolf, a pack omega from the scent of it. She is unworthy." The word unworthy echoed in the vast hall, a clear-toned bell of defiance. It was the same word Peter had used. A tremor of her past trauma, a cold, sickening fear shot through Adira. She instinctively flinched, her new power faltering. She had underestimated the king's speed. He moved so fast, he was a black blur. He was no longer holding her. He was across the hall, his hand wrapped around the young Lycan's throat, lifting him clear off the marble floor. The sound of choking filled the silence. "My king," Valerius gasped, taking a step forward. Michael held up a hand, silencing him. He held the struggling Lycan at eye level, his golden eyes burning with a calm, terrifying rage. "You," he whispered, his voice dangerously soft as the mail clawed at his wrist. "Have precisely 5 seconds to apologize to your queen. I suggest you use them." "I can't breathe," the Lycan choked out. "That is the point," Michael said calmly. 4. "Please, Majesty. 3. I... 2. Adira saw the raw, primal fear in the young Lycan's eyes and stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "Michael, please." The king's head snapped toward her. He stared at her, his expression unreadable, the mail still dangling from his grip. He was not a gentleman. He was territorial. He was lethal. And his mate had just been insulted. But she was also his mate, and she had made a request. With a final, contemptuous snarl, Michael threw the Lycan across the hall. He crashed into a stone pillar with a sickening crack and slumped to the floor, unconscious but breathing. Michael strode back to Adira in 2 steps, his rage still rolling off him in hot waves. He grabbed her hand, pulling it to his chest. "No one," he growled, his golden eyes boring into hers, "will ever disrespect you again. That is my vow. My protection is absolute. Do you understand?" She nodded, breathless. She understood. He was complex, dominant, and frightening. But in that moment, as the entire, terrified court knelt before her, she felt something she had never, ever felt before. She felt completely and utterly safe. Chapter 13. The Void, Peter's POV. The Silverpelt pack was broken. The sun rose on the grand clearing, but it brought no warmth. It illuminated a scene of profound disgrace. The pack members who had been forced to witness their future alpha's humiliation and their omega's cataclysmic rise were scattered, their faces gray with shock and fear. But for Peter, there was no sun. There was only the void. He sat on the cold ground where Adira had been claimed. The scent of her, that new, terrifying scent of ozone and ancient power, was burned into his senses. But beneath it was the phantom smell of his bond. The one he had torn. The one he had rejected. It was a physical, gnawing emptiness. A black hole in his chest where his soul was supposed to be. He had thought rejecting her would make him feel strong, free, in control. Instead, he felt hollowed out, weak, and unutterably cold. He had cut off his own arm to prove he didn't need it, and now he was bleeding to death. "Peter? Peter, get up." Delilah's voice was a shrill, grating sound that scraped against his raw nerves. He looked up. She was standing over him, her beautiful face twisted into an ugly, petulant snarl. Her dress was ripped, her hair a mess. "You're just going to sit there?" she snapped. "They're gone. She left. That creature took her, and you just let him." "Let him?" Peter croaked, his voice raw. He climbed to his feet, his body aching. He felt the emptiness inside him curdle into a hot, sick irritation. "He is the Lycan King, Delilah. What would you have had me do? Challenge him?" "He insulted you," she shrieked. "He insulted me. He called me hollow-hearted. And Adira. She looked at me. She... Delilah couldn't articulate the look of cold pity Adira had given her. "She's supposed to be nothing. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen." "She's the Lycan Queen," Peter whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Goddess, what have I done?" "Stop saying that." Delilah grabbed his arm, her nails digging in. "Who cares? I am your chosen Luna. The pack must respect me. We will fix this. We will tell them. We will tell them she was enchanted, that the king was bewitched." Peter ripped his arm from her grasp, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. The ambition that he had found so attractive was now a grotesque, screeching thing. He had rejected his soul for this, for a shallow, grasping, envious woman who hadn't even bothered to check on him, only on her own newfound, now threatened status. The irritation turned to disgust. "Leave me alone, Delilah." "Peter, you are the future Alpha. You will not walk away from me." He turned, the void in his chest a cold, dead weight. "I was a fool," he said, not to her, but to the empty air. "I rejected my destiny." He began to walk away, his steps heavy, haunted. He was leaving her there, alone in the clearing, but it didn't matter. He was already alone. He would be alone for the rest of his miserable, fated-less life. Chapter 14. The Queen's new power days in the Lycan court bled together in a haze of terrifying new sensations. Adira was housed in the king's personal chambers, a cavernous suite of rooms where the walls themselves seemed to hum with ancient power. She was given new clothes, silks and velvets in dark, regal colors that felt alien on her skin. But the greatest change was internal. The king's bond was a living, breathing thing inside her. It was a constant, warm presence at the base of her spine, a hum of golden energy that connected her, always, to Michael. She felt his moods as if they were her own, a spike of irritation from the council chamber, a wave of dark satisfaction as he passed a sentence, a low, thrumming possessiveness whenever he was near her. Her own senses were on fire. She could hear the skittering of a spider 100 yards away. She could smell the lie on a courtier before he even spoke, and she was strong. She had accidentally shattered a solid oak table when a serving girl had startled her. This new power was raw, though, and frightening. She was a queen, but she felt like a child playing with a blade. Tonight, she was alone, pacing the cold marble floor of her chambers. Michael was in a closed council, dealing with the political fallout of his return. Adira was restless, the silence of the fortress pressing in on her. She walked onto the balcony, a terrifying precipice carved into the mountainside. The wind howled, whipping her hair around her face, but she didn't feel the cold. She heard him before she saw him. Not his footsteps, but the sudden, sharp pull of the bond, a silken rope tugging at her center. He was here. Michael stepped out onto the balcony, shrugging off his heavy, fur-lined cloak. He had been in council for 6 hours, and he looked weary, the lines around his eyes deeper. "You should be sleeping," he said. His voice was not an order, just a quiet statement. I can't, Adira admitted, turning to face him. It's all too loud. He nodded, understanding. He moved to stand beside her, his presence a shield against the roaring wind. The bond is settling. It is awakening your own bloodline. The Omegas of the Silver Pelt Pack were not always so domestic. Your ancestors were strong. I don't feel strong, she whispered, looking at her hands. I feel breakable. He was silent for a moment. Then he reached out, not with the possessive grip of the king, but with a gentleness that shocked her. He took her hand, his much larger, warmer one enveloping hers. You are not breakable, he said, his voice a low rumble. He lifted her hand, turning it over. You have iron in your veins, Adira. It has just been waiting for a fire to forge it. He traced the lines on her palm, the simple touch sending a jolt of liquid heat straight through her. His golden eyes met hers, and the weariness in them was replaced by that familiar, dark fire. His gaze dropped to her mouth. You are not an Omega, he growled. You are not weak. You are mine. He tugged her hand, pulling her closer, and Adira's heart hammered, not with fear, but with a new, wild anticipation. She was finally beginning to understand him. Chapter 15. The Poison of Envy. Delilah's POV. Delilah stared at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror. The Silver Pelt Alpha house was supposed to be a palace. It was a glorified log cabin. She was supposed to be a Luna, adored and envied. Instead, she was a pariah. Her life was a nightmare. The pack, terrified of the Lycan King's wrath, treated her with a cold, fearful disdain. They blamed her. They whispered that her ambition had brought disgrace to them all. Alpha Boren, Peter's father, had confined them both to the pack house, his face a constant mask of cold fury, and Peter. Peter was the worst. He was a ghost. He barely spoke. He spent his days brooding, his eyes lost in the void, as he called it. He wouldn't touch her. He looked at her with a disgust that made her want to scream. This was not the future she had plotted for. This was not the power she had been promised. A message! A young pack warrior shouted from outside. A message from the Blackwood Pack! Delilah ran to the main hall. A traveling beta was handing a scroll to Alpha Boren. What is it? She demanded. Boren ignored her, breaking the wax seal. His eyes scanned the parchment. His face, already grim, turned ashen. He staggered back, dropping the scroll as if it had burned him. What? Delilah snapped, snatching it from the floor. She read the words. It was a formal decree, sent to all packs, announcing the king's new mate, announcing the coronation. And we celebrate the ascension of his fated Adira, of the Silver Pelt Pack, to her rightful place as Lycan Queen. Queen. The word was a physical blow, not just a mate, not just a consort. Queen, ruling over all packs, ruling over her. Delilah's vision went red. A choking, poisonous rage filled her throat. Adira. Weak, pathetic, sniveling little Adira, who she had walked over her entire life, was now the most powerful female on the continent. She, Delilah, was trapped in this wretched, broken pack, tied to a useless, broken alpha, while her sister was being crowned. No, Delilah whispered, her voice shaking with a terrifying cold fury. No, I will not allow it. Peter, drawn by the commotion, entered the room. What's wrong now, Delilah? He asked, his voice dead. Delilah looked at him, her mind working, a new, vicious and desperate plan forming. The king was powerful, yes, but he was also a male, and males, even kings, were fools. They were easily manipulated by whispers, by suggestions of betrayal. Peter had been. Perhaps Michael could be too. Nothing, Delilah said, her voice suddenly sweet, a chilling contrast to the murder in her eyes. Nothing at all, my love. I was just thinking. Adira was always so loyal to you. Peter looked at her, confused, but Delilah just smiled, a slow, toxic expression. If she couldn't have the power, she would destroy the one who did. She would frame her sister. She would burn Adira's new world to the ground. Chapter 16. The King's Council. The roaring wind of the balcony felt miles away, replaced by the heavy velvet silence of the king's chambers. Michael had not released her hand. He'd led her back inside, to a sprawling map of the territories etched into a massive stone table. The room was lit only by the low blue flames of the hearth, casting their faces in stark shadow and light. The intimacy of the moment was a fragile, dangerous thing, more potent than any public display of power. "The court saw your strength tonight," Michael said, his voice a low rumble. He finally released her hand, tapping a finger on the map over the lands bordering the Silverpelt territory. "When you stopped me from killing that fool." I didn't mean to undermine you," Adira said quickly, her old Omega instincts flaring up. "You didn't," he cut her off, his golden eyes intense. "You showed mercy, something this court has not seen in centuries. They are afraid of me," he stated, a simple fact. "But that is a blunt tool. What you did, that inspires loyalty. It is a tool of a queen." He paused, his gaze hardening. "But it is also a vulnerability." Adira frowned. "What do you mean?" "This court," he swept his hand across the room, "is a nest of vipers, Adira. They have served me for centuries out of fear. Now, you are here, my fated, my queen. You have a power they cannot understand, and they will test it. They will see your mercy as weakness. They will see your kindness as a flaw to be exploited." He moved closer, his sheer size seeming to absorb the firelight. "Your greatest test will not come from an enemy who shouts at the gates. It will come from a whisper in the halls. It will come from someone who smiles at you, someone who offers you comfort, someone who claims to be your friend." A cold premonition slid down her spine. "You're trying to scare me." "I am trying to prepare you," he corrected, his voice harsh. "You are no longer a Pack Omega. You cannot afford to trust blindly, especially," he added, his voice dropping, "with those from your past. Envy is a poison, and your sister, she holds a full cup." The sudden mention of Delilah made Adira flinch. Before she could process his warning, he cupped her chin, his thumb brushing her bottom lip. The analytical, cold king was gone, replaced by the raw, possessive mate. "I will not let them harm you," he growled, "but you must learn to see the daggers before they are at your throat." His gaze dropped to her mouth, and the world narrowed to the space between them. The political lesson was over. He lowered his head, and Adira's breath hitched, her eyes fluttering shut. She felt the brush of his lips, a promise of fire, a confirmation of their bond that she was, for the first time, ready to accept. But before their lips could truly meet, a sharp, urgent knock echoed through the chamber door. Michael's head snapped up, a low, frustrated growl rumbling in his chest. "Enter," he commanded. Lord Valerius swept into the room, his face a mask of grim urgency. He bowed low. "Your Majesty, your pardon. An urgent message has arrived from the Silverpelt Pack. It concerns the Queen." Chapter 17. The Traitor's Whisper. Delilah had penned the letter herself, her hand steady, her mind sharp and clear for the first time in weeks. She had not written it as herself. She had crafted it as a loyal, terrified Silverpelt warrior, one who had witnessed a terrible truth. She had filled it with the language of devotion, of fear for the king, of a terrible burden of conscience. She'd written that Adira was a spy, that her rejection by Peter was a long-concocted plan to infiltrate the Lycan court, that Adira was still loyal to her true mate, Peter, and that they met in secret. She wrote that Adira's new power was not from the king's bond, but from dark magic, and that she was plotting to find a way to sever the bond and assassinate the king, placing her real mate, Peter, on the throne. It was a masterpiece of paranoia, She had given it to a beta traveler, along with her last remaining silver jewelry, to ensure its swift and anonymous delivery. And now, she waited. The trap was set. In the Lycan court, Lord Valerius held the cheap parchment as if it were a venomous snake. He stood before his king, who had moved to stand in front of Adira, a protective, immovable wall of fury. "It arrived with the trade caravan, Majesty," Valerius said, his voice tight. "Delivered by a human runner, anonymously." "Read it," Michael commanded, his voice lethally calm. Adira gripped her hands together, the king's warning about whispers echoing in her ears. Valerius's eyes scanned the page, his aristocratic features tightening with disgust. "She is not what she seems, Your Majesty. The rejection was a lie, a performance to gain your sympathy. Her bond to Alpha Peter is not broken. They plot against you. She is a serpent. She will be your end." Valerius stopped, unable to continue. The silence in the chamber was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Adira felt the blood drain from her face. It was so utterly, poisonously Delilah. It was the exact same tactic, a public lie to isolate her, to make her seem treacherous. And it had worked on Peter. Her new, fragile confidence began to crumble. "Michael," she whispered, her voice shaking. Michael did not look at her. He held his hand out to Valerius. "Give it to me." He took the parchment. His golden eyes scanned the words, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He read it once, then a second time. Adira's heart hammered so hard she thought it would break her ribs. This was the test. This was the dagger he had warned her about. She could feel the weight of his suspicion, his doubt, a cold pressure against their bond. He had called her merciful. He had called her strong. But he was also a king, an ancient, ruthless ruler who had been warned of vipers, and a perfectly crafted lie had just been dropped into his nest. He slowly refolded the parchment, his movements deliberate. He turned, his golden eyes finding hers. They were not warm. They were not the eyes of her mate. They were the cold, assessing, ancient eyes of the Lycan King. He believes it, she thought, a cold, sickening wave of despair washing over her. Just like Peter, he believes it. Chapter 18. The Seeds of Doubt. The king's silence was a living, breathing monster in the room. Adira's legs felt weak. She had been ripped from her home, thrust into a world of predators, and the one person who was her anchor, her protector, now looked at her as if she were a stranger, as if she were the lie Delilah had painted. "Michael," she tried again, her voice stronger, desperate. "You know me. You feel the bond. You know that isn't true." "What I know," Michael said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "is that you were, for 18 years, loyal to another male. A male you believed was your destiny." He turned from her, pacing toward the hearth. "What I know is that your sister is consumed by an envy that would burn the world to ash. She is capable of this lie." "Then you believe me," Adira cried, a surge of relief making her dizzy. "But I also know," he continued, turning back, his face a mask of cold calculation, "that a lie is only dangerous if it is allowed to fester." He held up the parchment. "This traitor's whisper is not just for me. It was delivered to Valerius. By now, the entire court is aware of its contents." Adira's stomach dropped. She understood. The whispers she'd heard when she first arrived, Omega, weak, wolf, would now be replaced by a new one. Traitor. "They are already suspicious of you," Michael stated, confirming her fear. "You are an outsider, a wolf, an Omega who became a queen. They want to believe this. They want you to be a usurper. It would make their world make sense again." "So what do we do?" Adira asked, her newfound regal bearing crumbling. She felt like the 18-year-old Omega again, trapped and powerless. "How do I fight this? You can't just execute me." "No," Michael agreed, his eyes unreadable. I cannot. He looked past her, at Lord Valerius, who was watching his king with a hawk-like intensity, waiting for a command. The accusation has been made public. Therefore, the proof of its falsehood must also be public. A new, cold dread settled over Adira. This was not a private matter between mates. This was a political trial. They believe you are a spy for the Silverpelt Pack, Michael said, his voice devoid of emotion. They believe your heart belongs to your former mate. They believe your sister is your accomplice. She's no accomplice, Adira burst out. She's the one who wrote this. Perhaps, Michael said. And perhaps you are a brilliant liar. I cannot simply tell the court you are innocent. I must show them. We must have a trial. Adira stared at him, her mind racing. A trial. Here, in this court of vipers who already hated her. Then I will testify, she said, lifting her chin. I will tell them the truth. No, Michael said, his word final. You will not. They will. A slow, cold understanding dawned on Adira. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. They? Michael, what are you going to do? He looked at her, his golden eyes burning with the cold fire of a king passing judgment. I am going to bring the entire disease here and cut it out at the root. Valerius. Majesty? Send a royal summons to the Silverpelt Pack, Alpha Boron, his son Peter, and the Lady Delilah. They are to present themselves to my court within 3 days, for the public trial of their queen. Chapter 19. The King's Decree. The decree went out like a thunderclap. It was not a request. It was a royal summons, carried by the king's own imperial guard, their black and gold armor a terrifying sight in the struggling Silverpelt territory. The news spread through the Lycan court like wildfire. The king, in his cold wisdom, was not murdering his new mate in the shadows. He was putting her, and her accusers, on public trial. Adira was a prisoner in her own opulent chambers. Michael had not visited her since the decree. He was, as Valerius had politely informed her, making preparations. She was isolated, left alone with the whispers of the court and the cold, sick dread in her stomach. She tried to feel him through the bond, but he was shielded, his presence a distant, cold star. He was not her mate right now. He was the king. He was her judge. Her newfound confidence was gone, replaced by the ghost of the Omega she had been. Peter had believed Delilah's lies with no evidence. Michael, her powerful, ancient mate, was now demanding a public trial. Was he just a more calculating version of Peter? Was he, too, just looking for a reason to discard her, an unsuitable Omega? The doubt was a poison, weakening her, making her question the very reality of the king's bond. On the 3rd day, she was dressed by silent serving women in a gown of deep midnight blue velvet. It was heavy and regal, but it felt like a shroud. Lord Valerius appeared at her door, his face impassive. The king is seated, Your Majesty. Your pack has arrived. He led her through the echoing, silent halls. The court was not in the Great Hall, but in the Amphitheater of Judgment, a vast open-air arena carved into the stone, reserved for high treason. The entire Lycan nobility was present, thousands of them, their cold, assessing eyes fixed on her as she walked to the center. Michael was there, seated on a massive throne of black granite. He was not her Michael. He was the Lycan King, a figure of terrible, ancient majesty, his face a mask of cold iron. He did not look at her. And then she saw them. To the side, looking small and pathetic under the weight of the court's power, stood what was left of her past. Alpha Boron, his face gray and haggard. Peter, who looked like a walking corpse, his eyes hollow, the void in his soul visible to all. And Delilah. She was dressed in her finest, a defiant, if slightly tattered green dress. When she saw Adira, she didn't look afraid. She didn't look cowed. A slow, venomous and utterly triumphant smirk spread across her face. She truly believed she had done it. She believed she had trapped the king and queen, and that she was about to be vindicated. "The trial begins," Michael's voice boomed, striking the stone and echoing across the arena. His golden eyes, as cold and distant as the moon, finally settled on her. "Queen Adira stands accused of treason, of conspiring with her former pack to assassinate the king. We will hear the evidence, bring forth the accuser." Chapter 20. The Return to Silverpelt. "There is a complication, Your Majesty," Valerius said, his voice low, just as the trial was to begin. He leaned toward the throne. The anonymous letter stated the treasonous meetings took place on Silverpelt land. The accused, they claim the only fair trial is one held on the land of the alleged crime. Adira's head snapped up. She saw Delilah whisper frantically to Peter, who then spoke to his father, who nodded. It was a ploy. "They believe you will not leave your fortress," Valerius murmured. "They believe it is a way to stall, to claim an unfair trial." A dangerous, glacial silence fell. Michael's eyes narrowed, fixed on the small, defiant cluster of silverpelt wolves. Delilah was still smirking. She thought she had found a loophole. "They are mistaken," Michael said, his voice a low, deadly promise. He rose from his throne, a towering, terrifying figure. The entire amphitheater gasped. "The trial will not be held here." He pointed a single, black-gloved finger at the Silverpelt delegation. "This began in their clearing. It will end in their clearing. We ride for the Silverpelt pack, now." The journey was a tense, agonizing blur. Adira rode beside the king, but they were surrounded by his imperial guard. They were not mates. They were a judge and his prisoner. The Silverpelt trio was transported under heavy guard, their faces a mixture of confusion and, in Delilah's case, growing confidence. She believed the king's dramatic move was a sign of his uncertainty, a way to appease the other packs by showing fairness. When they burst through the shadow fold into the grand clearing, Adira's breath caught in her throat. It was exactly as she'd left it, but it felt smaller. The entire Silverpelt pack was already assembled, forced there by the king's advance guard. They were kneeling, their faces pressed to the dirt, trembling in terror. This was the same ground, the same moon, now a pale crescent in the sky, the same audience. But she was different. Michael dismounted, his black cloak sweeping behind him. He didn't take the Alpha's platform. He strode to the exact center of the clearing, the same spot where Peter had rejected her, the same spot where Michael had claimed her. The ground there seemed to hum, permanently saturated with their combined power. "Here," he boomed, his voice rolling over the terrified pack. "We will have the truth." He turned to the guard, his voice like cracking ice. "Bring the accuser, and bring the accused." Adira was led forward, her heart hammering. She stood on one side of the king. On the other, Delilah was shoved forward by a guard. She stumbled, but caught herself, her eyes blazing with righteous, false fury. "I am no accuser," she cried, playing her part. "I am a victim. We all are. Of her." She pointed a trembling, dramatic finger at Adira. "She has bewitched him. She is a traitor." Adira met her sister's gaze. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, building rage. This would not be a repeat. "And where," Michael said, his voice deceptively calm, "is your proof?" "It is. It is in the letter," Delilah stammered, her plan not accounting for this. "The anonymous letter?" Michael asked, a dangerous silken tone to his voice. "The one you wrote?" Delilah's face went white. "What? No, I would never." "Then," the king said, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across his face, "you will not mind that I have brought another witness." He turned his gaze to the edge of the clearing. "The beta traveler you paid with your mother's silver. Bring him forward." Chapter 21. The Trial of the Sisters. Two of the king's imperial guard marched the beta traveler into the center of the clearing. He was a thin, nervous-looking wolf, his eyes wide with terror as he found himself the center of attention. Delilah's face went white. She shot a panicked look at Peter, but he was staring at the ground, lost in his own void, oblivious. I don't know who that is, Delilah shrieked, her voice cracking. This is a trick, a new lie. She has bewitched him, just as she bewitched you, Your Majesty. She turned to Michael, her hands clasped in a desperate false plea. My king, you are a just ruler. You must see the truth. I saw it. I saw them meeting in secret near the old river. Peter was torn. He still felt the pull of their old bond. And she used it. She promised him power. She promised him your throne. Adira stood silent, her face pale but her expression cold. She watched her sister weave her tapestry of lies, each word more desperate than the last. Delilah's performance was masterful. She wept. She accused. She pleaded. She painted a vivid picture of a treacherous Omega, still hopelessly in love with her first mate, manipulating a grieving Alpha and a new, trusting king. The Silverpelt pack was mesmerized. The whispers started again. It did make a sick kind of sense. Why else would the king take her? She must have enchanted him. Delilah, sensing she was winning them over, grew bolder. She is a spy, she screamed, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at Adira. She is a traitor to her own pack and a serpent in your bed. I tried to warn you. This anonymous letter, it was the only way. I was afraid for my life. Afraid of her. She finished, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She looked like a tragic heroine. She had played her final, desperate card. The clearing was silent, the tension so thick it was a physical weight. Every eye, Lycan and Wolf, turned to the king, waiting for his judgment. Michael remained still for a long, agonizing moment, his face a mask of stone. He let the accusation hang in the air, letting its poison spread. Adira's heart hammered, a cold dread creeping into her. He had to believe her. Finally, the king turned his cold, golden eyes, not to Delilah, not to the beta, but to Adira. You have heard the accusation. His voice boomed, devoid of all warmth. What say you, Queen Adira? Chapter 22. The Unraveling. Adira looked at her sister, at the pack that had scorned her, and at the man she once loved. Then she looked at her king. She stepped forward, her regal blue gown sweeping the dirt. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the whisper of an Omega. It was the clear, cold, and resonant voice of a queen. I say, she lies. Delilah let out a sharp, theatrical scoff. Of course you'd deny it. Where is your proof, sister? I do not need to provide it, Adira said, her gaze steady. She is correct. Michael's voice cut through the air. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on a now faltering Delilah. Because you already have. He turned to the trembling beta traveler. Tell this assembly what you told my guard when they found you on the road. Tell them who gave you the letter. The beta, trapped in the king's golden gaze, fell to his knees. It was her, he stammered, pointing a shaky finger at Delilah. The Lady Delilah. She gave me a silver necklace, said it was her mother's, and a bag of coin. She told me to get the letter to the Lycan court, to make sure I said it was from a loyal warrior. Delilah reeled back as if struck. He's lying. He's with her. It's a conspiracy. She got to him. Silence, Michael roared. The force of his command was a physical blow, knocking Delilah off her feet and onto the hard-packed earth. You accuse your queen of meeting her former mate in secret by the old river, a bold claim, one that would require witnesses. I am the witness, Delilah cried from the ground. Are you? Michael asked, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips. He was enjoying this. Because it is a fascinating accusation, especially since, for the entire time since my queen and I left this territory, your chosen mate, Alpha Peter, has been under the constant, invisible surveillance of my Imperial Guard." Peter's hollow eyes snapped up. Alpha Borin gasped, his face turning ashen. "He has not left the pack house in 3 weeks," Michael continued, his voice a casual, deadly purr. "He has not spoken to anyone in secret. He has spent his days, and I quote from my guard's report, languishing in a state of profound and pathetic self-pity. He has not met with anyone, especially not my queen." The truth landed with the force of a guillotine. The entire pack stared. Delilah's plot wasn't just a lie, it was an impossible lie. Michael turned to Adira, and for the first time in days, the cold judicial mask fell. His golden eyes were blazing with a fierce, possessive pride. He had not believed the lie for a second. He had simply built the stage to watch his enemy destroy herself. Delilah began to sob, a dry, broken animal sound. No. No. It was supposed to work. It worked on Peter. It was supposed to work on you. She had just confessed. The clearing stared, horrified, as she confirmed her own treason. The trap had never been for Adira. It was for Delilah, and she had walked right into it. Chapter 23. The Alpha's Regret. It worked on Peter. The words echoed in the dead, horrified silence, louder than any roar. Peter stared at Delilah, at the pathetic, weeping creature on the ground. It was true, all of it. He hadn't just been a fool, he had been a tool. A weak, arrogant, and easily manipulated pawn in her desperate, jealous game. The rejection, the humiliation of his fated, the loss of his own soul. It had all been for this. The cold, dead void in his chest flashed hot, not with anger, but with a searing, bottomless self-disgust. He had been weak. He had allowed this poison to convince him that his own destiny was unsuitable. "Peter," Delilah whispered, her voice broken. She began to crawl toward him, her hands outstretched like a beggar. "Peter, please, tell them you love me, not her. Tell them you chose me, please." He recoiled from her touch as if she were a leper. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the beautiful, popular woman he had chosen was gone. In her place was a sniveling, treacherous stranger, her face streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with a madness he now found repulsive. His voice, when he spoke, was dead. "You," he said, the word dripping with a venom that shocked even him, "are a plague." Delilah froze, her hand hovering in the air. "You used me," he continued, his voice rising, gaining a bitter, broken strength. "You poisoned me against my fated. You helped me destroy my own soul. For this? To be Luna of a broken pack? And when that wasn't enough, you tried to destroy her. Again." He looked past Delilah, his gaze landing on Adira. She was standing beside the king, bathed in a new, cold power, her sapphire and gold eyes watching him with a pity that was worse than any hatred. He saw, in that instant, everything he had thrown away. He saw the strength he had called weakness. He saw the honor he had called unsuitable. He saw the queen he had rejected. He took a public, deliberate step back from Delilah, severing the last, invisible thread between them. "I want nothing to do with you," he spat. "You are no Luna of mine. You are nothing to this pack. You are nothing to me." It was a final, public rejection, an echo of the one that had started it all. Delilah let out a choked sound as her last hope crumbled. Peter didn't care. He turned his full attention to Adira. He did the only thing left for him to do. He dropped to his knees, bowing his head in the dirt before the woman he had cast aside. "My queen," he choked out, the words tearing his throat raw. I was a fool. I was blind, arrogant. I rejected my destiny. I am sorry. I will live with that, forever." Chapter 24. The Lycan Queen. All eyes were on Adira. Her pack, her king, her broken former mate, and her hysterical defeated sister. They all waited for her judgment. Delilah, seeing Peter's final betrayal, let out a wail of complete and utter despair. She was alone. She scrambled across the dirt, her nails digging into the ground, a desperate animal. She grabbed the hem of Adira's midnight blue gown, her grip frantic. "Adira! Addie, please!" she sobbed, her beautiful face a grotesque mask of snot and tears. "Please, you're my sister. You have to forgive me. I didn't know. I was jealous. I was just so jealous. Please." The proud, popular Delilah, who had smirked over Peter's shoulder, was now a groveling, broken creature at her feet. The entire Silver Pelt pack watched, witnessing the final, absolute reversal of power. Adira looked down at her sister. She felt the cold wind of the clearing, the same wind that had chilled her on the night of her rejection. She remembered the physical, soul-splitting pain. She looked at Delilah's clawing, desperate hands on her dress. Then she looked at Michael. He was watching her, his golden eyes intense, his expression unreadable. He was not interfering. This was her justice to pass. Slowly, deliberately, Adira reached down. Delilah's eyes lit with a wild, desperate hope. But Adira didn't take her hand. She simply unhooked Delilah's fingers from the velvet, one by one, and took a single step back, breaking the contact. "No," Adira said. Her voice was not loud, it was not angry. It was quiet, cold, and final, carrying the ancient authority of the Lycan lineage. "You are not my sister," she said, her voice clear in the silence. "You are a lesson." She turned from Delilah's crumpled form. She looked at Peter, still kneeling, his head bowed in shame. He was a ghost, a living monument to his own arrogance. He would be alpha of this disgraced pack, forever bound to his mistake, forever living in the void he had craved. That was a sentence more profound than any she could pass. She had faced her tormentors. She had seen their lies exposed. She had watched them break each other. And she was, finally, free. Adira turned her back on her sister's broken sobs and her former mate's hollow regret. She turned her back on the Silver Pelt pack and the small, sad life she had once been forced to live. She walked across the clearing, her steps steady, her head held high. She stopped in front of Michael, the King of Kings, her mate. He held out his hand. She took it. Their fingers laced together, and the power of their bond flared to life, a visible, golden aura that shimmered around them both, a silent promise of a new future. He looked down at her, and his harsh, kingly features softened into a look of fierce, possessive, and absolute pride. "My queen," he murmured, loud enough for all to hear. He pulled her to his side, and together they turned to face the stunned, silent clearing. Adira, the rejected Omega, was gone. In her place stood Adira, the Lycan queen, her spirit forged in betrayal, her power awakened by destiny, and her future secured at the side of her king.